Our top focus story on the broadcast is serious escalation at the line of control in North Kashmir, in the Kupwara sector, in Machhal sector, and in adjoining sectors in Keran. Initially, it started with small arms fire, escalated to area weapons. Mortars were used. The Pakistanis have unleashed their snipers at the line of control. They've been targeting Indian positions. We've had 2 fatalities. 2 brave Indian soldiers made the supreme sacrifice of their lives. 4 others have been injured. And now India is responding for effect. There's been a serious response from the Indian side. I quickly want to cut across to India Today's consultant editor Shiv Arur for more on this. In a moment, we'll also be joined by our editor defense Abhishek Bhalla. But Shiv, to you first. What explains this sudden spike of violence at the LoC this time?
Gaurav, this is a significant escalation by the Pakistan Army in North Kashmir's Kupwara sector. It began with an unprovoked ceasefire violation in the Naugam sector this morning, in which 2 soldiers, as we reported, were killed in action and 4 were severely injured. This was a direct attack on a mortar position. It was completely unprovoked. Very, very, tragic consequences of that, 2 soldiers dying. And then this afternoon, it significantly escalated to the Keran and Machhal sectors, also in Kupwara, where the heavy artillery heavy and medium artillery were actually used. So not just mortars and small arms, but actual artillery shells were fired of the kind that are actually used during border conflicts and even the Kargil war, which you reported. So this is a significant escalation. There has been a crossfire that's been on for many weeks and months now during the standoff, in Ladakh. But this is clearly and very much part of Pakistan's design to pile the pressure on the Indian army even as the standoff in Ladakh continues. So this is something that the Indian army has very much catered for. It's not like it's come out of the blue or is any kind of a surprise. The fact that, a two-front operations is something that the Indian army, the Indian military in general, has always trained and prepared for. It's just that it's becoming more and more real with each passing day.
Shiv, for the moment, many thanks for joining me. I also quickly want to bring in Abhishek Bhalla before I bring in Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, former Director General of Infantry, to explain this escalation and the fact, are we on top of this escalation matrix on either side, at the line of control and the line of actual control. But Abhishek, this ceasefire violation is a serious escalation. The fact that artillery is being used, but south of Pir Panjal, there have been a series of ceasefire violations in Poonch, Rajouri, all the way down to the Krishna Ghati sector, also Sundarbani. Abhishek.
Gaurav, as we speak, I have information that there was another ceasefire violation about a couple of hours back. And this has been the trend, not just over the last few days or weeks, but the entire year. And what's interesting is that, the ceasefire violations escalated during the time when the standoff with China started. Now, what military observers say is that it's still early days to link it with China, but the trend shows that at the time, the Indian Army was taking on the Chinese belligerents at the line of actual control in Ladakh. At a similar time, the ceasefire violations increased here. There was a spike. There have been more than 3,000 ceasefire violations this year.
What explains this spike? What explains this spike? Also the fact, Abhishek, that it's not restricted to small arms. It's not restricted to small arms. It's not restricted to mortars. Now it's escalated to artillery. And artillery means that longer distances, 25 and 30 kilometers away, the fact that civilians are being targeted, the fact that military defenses are specifically being targeted marks a very serious escalation. Before I come back to you and bring in General Kulkarni, let's quickly take a look at this report that Abhishek Bhalla just filed.
With the big guns and prime assets deployed along the line of actual control, Indian forces are battle ready to take on any Chinese belligerents. While the LAC has been relatively quiet, the line of control on the other side is on the boil. On Thursday, in two separate incidents of firing by the Pakistanis, 3 Indian Army soldiers were martyred and 4 were injured in the Krishna Ghati sector of Poonch and Naugam sector of Kupwara. This year, 12 soldiers have so far been killed in Pakistan firing at the LoC. Last year, the number was 19, while in 2017, 23 soldiers were martyred. This year, ceasefire violations by Pakistan have seen a record spike, the highest in 17 years. India has more than matched Pakistan's artillery and mortar shelling, as also anti-tank guided missiles. The linkages between Pakistani and Chinese aggression are becoming clearer more and more.
There will be a strong, befitting response to the Pakistani provocation in the LoC. In fact, the ceasefire violations are to assist in their attempts of infiltration. But Indian armed forces have got a strong counter-infiltration grid in this area.
It's not just the LoC. Pakistan has also been targeting the international boundary with over 242 firing incidents reported till August end. The desperation to infiltrate maximum terrorists before the winter sets in is visible. Remember, this has been a year when top terror commanders have been killed in the valley, leaving several groups leaderless.
As the winters are drawing close, Pakistan is under a lot of pressure to infiltrate the terrorists and also to enhance its lost base in the hinterland. Over the last 2.5 years, the Indian armed forces have been able to negate and neutralize the efforts of all terrorists who have been infiltrated.
Pakistan-based terror outfits have also adopted a new modus operandi. Weapons are being dropped through drone and terrorists are made to infiltrate without arms so that security forces don't fire at them. Many such attempts have been detected by the Indian Army at the LoC in the last few months.
It's been a busy year for the Indian Army, both at the line of actual control and the line of control. While at the LoC, things have been extremely hot all year round. This has been the worst year in terms of ceasefire violations in the last 17 years. And officials say that in the last few months of this year, the ceasefire violations are likely to continue, as Pakistan would want to make sure that maximum infiltrations take place before the winter sets in. Abhishek Bhalla in New Delhi for India Today.
I quickly want to bring in General Kulkarni into this conversation. General, you've been DG Infantry. You've looked at Pakistan and China very closely. What explains the spike in violence, in tension, in the use of caliber of weapons at the LC?
Gaurav, it's quite clear that Pakistan wants to show to its very dear and absolutely a friend of theirs, primarily with a view to be able to convince them that we are with you. And secondly, the Chinese themselves are provocating the Pakistanis that while they are indulging in talks with the Indians, continue pressurizing on the LoC. And thirdly, very important is the winters are setting in. They have not been able to succeed. Most of the local militants seem to be wiped out. There aren't much that the Pakistanis are able to do in the Kashmir Valley. So this is the right time, they feel so, that they must push in as many as they can. And therefore, I think after a long time, the Pakistanis have actually now started onto artillery. They'll get a befitting reply, that's a different thing. But the very fact that Pakistanis are doing at this point of time is indicative that they are on the back foot. They seem to realize it, that world over, they have been seen as a terrorism growing factory. Nothing else. Everybody knows that Pakistan and terrorism are
They
synonymous.
may well be. The world has recognized China as China supporting a terrorist state. But we've had fatalities at the LC. We've lost 2, and I'm just learning that a 3rd soldier has also been killed in action of our own. So we've had 3 fatalities today. We've had a couple of fatalities a couple of days ago. There are also a spike in our losses. When India says we are responding and for effect, what does that mean?
See, what happens, Gaurav, in all these kind of incidents, you'll always notice that the LoC would be taken care of. There is no problem. The Pakistanis can be sorted out within no time. But what is very important that we need to be careful about is the collusivity between Pakistan and China. Pakistan will do what it wants to do. It wants to show solidarity with its all-weather friend China. That is accepted, and we know that Pakistan will do what it is doing. But what is more important is the Chinese are indulging in talk with India and unable to do anything much on the LAC. They're provoking the Pakistanis to do along the LoC, and thereby the pressure on India continues. That is not receding in any manner. And this is what is a cause of concern, that despite all that, and you'll be surprised if I tell you something, way back in 1967, a similar incident when at Nathula thing was happening, and when Mr. Moraji Desai was on a visit to the United States, he was asked the same question, and you will be surprised to hear the kind of reply that he gave. He said the Chinese are pressurizing India with the view to ensure that we toe their line. This bullying tactics of Chinese is on. They are very angry with India because we aren't towing their line. Imagine, that was 1967 and this is now 2020.
Very interesting point you make, General. It hasn't, and for the benefit of our viewers, General's talking about 1967 Nathula. Remember, today is 1st of October. Today is also the day that we remember our braves who made the supreme sacrifice of their lives at Chola and Nathula in 1967. I will tell you that story in just a moment. But there's breaking news coming in from the United States of America. And this is big information that's coming in. A U.S. Congressional Committee in the United States of America has recommended decisive action against China. So this is a U.S. Congressional Committee. This is a bipartisan committee in the United States of America, and this panel has recommended decisive action against China. This committee also notes the fact that China has been violating sovereignty of countries. It talks about Chinese transgressions and failure, Chinese failure at the line of actual control. This committee also talks about how America needs to support the British proposal, British Prime Minister's proposal for a G10 group of 10 democracies, including India, to counter Chinese on 5G and also on alternate supply chain. I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan, joining us for more on this big story. Geeta, that's a big statement that comes from a US congressional panel. Bring us details.
Well, yes, it is a very important report, given that there is a growing voice in the United States of America how to counter China, and in that, US has indeed found a friend in India, and India has become a very important partner for the United States of America, Gaurav, not just because it is strategically placed, but because it can become an alternate to the supply chains, the global supply chains Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been talking about, and that certainly is mentioned in this congressional report. It also talks about Democracy 10 that he just mentioned. Boris Johnson had proposed this, that democracies, the 10 democracies have to come together to fight the authoritarian regime of China. Remember, the congressional report comes after a series of legislations and proposals that were put forth by various senators and congressmen, which included Scott Perry, the likes of Menendez, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of big names in the United States of America, senators and congressmen alike, who have written to their various committees, to the Foreign Relations Committee in the House and the Senate, asking and seeking action against China. Now we see a congressional report that has come in to counter Chinese supply lines, to counter the to ensure freedom of navigation, and to ensure that authoritarian regimes are tackled and contained. So this is very, very specific to China, a very important one, and India certainly US looking at as a partner.
Democracies need to do that. Democracies need to come together, not just G7, it now has to be G10, India included. Geeta, for the moment, many thanks for joining me. Just a short while back, we had General Kulkarni talk about 1967 and how China was then using Pakistan to bully India. Let me now tell you what happened in 1967. There are multiple instances when India has stood up to China And the moment India stands up to China, China retreats. 1967, we'll talk about Nathula. We'll talk about Chola. Incidentally, the Chola incident happened today in 1962, the 1st of October. That Chola day was remembered by the Trishakti Corps in Sukna. But take a look. Whether it's Chola, Nathula, Sundarongchu, all these instances just show when you stand up to China, the dragon buckles under pressure.
Date September 11, 1967. Place Nathula, India-Tibet border. As Indian Army soldiers fenced the India-Tibet border at Nathula in Sikkim, Chinese soldiers repeatedly objected to the fencing. Undeterred, Indian soldiers continued to put barbed wire fence and lay the communication cable. The previous week had seen several arguments, including a series of scuffles and even stone pelting. But that cold September morning, the Chinese suddenly opened fire from their post using a machine gun.
Opportunity came India's way in 1967 when there were two incidents, one at Nathula in September and one slightly a few kilometers north of it in Chola. The Chinese had come across Chola and questioned Indian right to occupy their own territory. In retaliation, the Indian forces acted against China and pushed them back nearly 3 kilometers, inflicting heavy casualties.
Several Indian soldiers were killed in action. The commanding officer himself was injured in battle. Two young officers made the supreme sacrifice of their lives, launching a frontal attack to silence the Chinese machine gun nest. And then the Indian artillery opened up.
Chinese came in big strength, about 200, 250 of them with the bayonets and the rifle slung, trying to intimidate the army and telling them that the Indian army that you cannot do this. And then they opened fire and they shot at the commanding officer, Colonel Rai. And Indian army thereafter in the next 4 days took the better of the Chinese PLA in many ways. PLA had 300 dead soldiers, and whereas 88 of Indian army soldiers made a supreme sacrifice.
The Indian side enjoyed an advantage of height, with the artillery observation post officer in a position to look deep inside the Chinese defenses. India's accurate artillery shelling had Chinese casualties mounting. China threatened to use air power, but after 3 days, an uneasy truce was reached. The Chinese had lost almost 400 soldiers against approximately 80 of ours. However, the Chinese once again tried to dislodge Indian soldiers from another commanding height at Chola on the 1st of October. The brave soldiers of the Jammu and Kashmir Rifles and the Gorkhas pushed the Chinese back another 3 kilometers even here. The Chinese had learnt an important lesson. Nathula and Chola have been peaceful till date. In 1986, then Chief of the Army Staff, General Sundarji, airlifted an entire brigade for the defense of Tawang. Russian Mi-26 heavy-lift helicopters were used to air-land an army brigade at Zemithang, south of the line of actual control. Incidentally, between the 18th and 20th of October, in 1962, the Chinese had attacked India on the 20th of October. In 1986, Indian troops took position on the Hatungla Ridge overlooking Sundarongchu and multiple other mountain tops, dominating Chinese positions.
This they faced a different Indian army at that point of time. Indian army under General Sundarji built up its strength, moved troops out there. And there was a time when everyone thought that Indian army would physically, using kinetic force, evict the Chinese from Sundarongchu. Indian army started occupying the dominating heights along the Sundarongchu, and Chinese thought that the Indian army would go back, but Indian army wouldn't budge from there.
The then Chinese Supreme Leader, Deng Xiaoping, himself threatened India with another 1962. But General Sundarji held his nerve and ultimately the Chinese backed down. That standoff lasted nearly half a decade. The writing is on the wall. Be it Nathula or Chola in 1967 or Sundarongchu in 1986-87. Each time India stood up to China, the dragon was forced to retreat. India is sending out that message not just to own soldiers across the line of actual control, but also to Beijing. India does not intend to buckle under pressure and is deployed for the long haul. With cameraman Kripal Singh in Delhi, Gaurav Sawant for India Today.
The story is very important for Indians to know. When we stand up to China, China buckles under pressure. But Chinese frustration at this point of time is mounting, and that is why there's clear and present danger along the entire line of actual control from Arunachal Pradesh to Ladakh till the time a solution is found to this current standoff. We'll be tracking that story very closely. That is all I have time for on the show this evening. Many thanks for watching.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.